This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of February 17th, 2025. Alongside my tag team partner, Matt Moscardi, I'm Damian Rawlis. On today's countdown, IDEX Laboratories is getting rid of its smartest director. Kinsale Capital Group is getting rid of its lowest performing director. Mike Levin discusses proxy activism in 2025 from Free Float's very own shareholder primacy podcast. Another vote against a director who skipped a meeting. And on the big votes, shareholders are getting quite political at Apple and Deere. Let's start with our top stories. Dr. Asha Collins, a high-performing black director at IDEX Laboratories, has stepped down from the board. She had the second highest batting average at 700 and had only served since 2020. IDEX did not state why Dr. Collins, who has a PhD in cancer biology and microbiology, retired, other than the normal frustrating boilerplate that her decision to resign was not the result of any disagreement with the company, blah, blah, blah. Matt, it would be nice to know why such a smart person who performs so well is leaving your board after only 4 or 5 years.
That sounds like they outlived their welcome.
Director Brian Reuter has stepped down from the board of Informatica. Despite the fact there are only 2 female directors with a total of 9% influence, Informatica immediately appointed another man to the board, Alex van der Linde, who will serve as a Class 3 director, meaning that shareholders won't be allowed to have a say on his appointment until the annual meeting of stockholders to be held in 2027. Good news at Kinsale Capital Group, where the director with the worst overall performance is stepping down. That's James Ritchie. He was hitting 453 overall on a board where all other directors were hitting at least 700. His TSR performance was especially bad at 266. Overall, the board was hitting 785 in TSR. So it's nice to see a low-performing director stepping down. Palo Alto Networks has appointed 2 new directors, Hella Thorning-Schmidt and Ralph Hamers. They will each receive a Golden Hello equity grant worth $1 million. In addition, Palo Alto directors receive about $400,000 in annual pay. Compensation amounts such as these immediately call into question whether the new directors will be able to provide effective and independent oversight of management. And lastly, at Whirlpool, Director John Morikis is replacing board member Larry Spencer. Whirlpool is a big board, 13 total board members, but only 3 women. Instead of making the effort to find a 4th female director in an industry whose primary buyers are other women, Whirlpool opted for the CEO of a company that sells paint. To make matters worse, Whirlpool already has a dude on their board, Rich Kramer, who served on that very same paint company board, that's Sherwin-Williams. So now they have 2 Sherwin-Williams.
Yeah. Double paint.
In our proxy cage, that's it for our top stories. In our proxy cage match this week, Matt, we're doing something different. Why don't you introduce what we're doing this week?
Yeah, so Mike Levin from the Shareholder Primacy podcast that he co-hosts with Ann Lipton. I was actually on the podcast with Mike this week, and we talked about activism in 2025 and some of the trends over the end of 2024. We're going to cut up some of that, and he's going to talk about trends that he's seeing. There's a couple of proxy fights he's talking about, and really the role of proxy advisors when it comes to, their interaction with activists. So let's listen to Mike and I for a couple minutes from the Shareholder Primacy Podcast.
When we looked at it a year ago, activists had won out of, I think, 15 contests, had won maybe at least one seat in only 4, and won everything they were looking for only at a couple. So at least based on this very small initial sample, in terms of voting outcomes, activists seem to be doing okay.
You got a sense of the change, though? Is it because of who the activists are targeting, or is it something else? Is it like a thematic change? Like, it's not regulatory, right? There was
nothing changed in the rules. No, I think activists got a lot smarter. And in this case, some of it is, of course, situation specific. So, for example, at Massimo, that was just a troubled company. And
that was multi-year, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
That was a
took 2
multi-year
years,
thing,
right?
Yeah.
Same thing with Mantle Ridge at Air Products. Paul Halal at Mantle Ridge really knows what he's doing here. And it was a company that needed a lot of work, and the shareholder sentiment was kind of on his side. But a couple of these others were, it could have been more of a jump ball, and the activists just did things pretty shrewdly, communicated pretty well, and started to prevail again. And this is in voting outcomes. One of the big themes in the past couple of years is because of universal proxy, companies are settling a lot more and a lot quicker. And so, this may be a little bit of a clue that because of these results, companies may be encouraged to settle even more than they had been inclined to do so kind of before this. There's one that's coming up, the votes next week. Barrington Capital, Jim Mitaratanda, a long-time, very experienced, really good activist, has been doing a proxy contest at Matthews, a tech company. They're looking for 3 out of 3. And it's worth noting that one, all the proxy advisors came out in favor of Barrington and so forth. So if that doesn't settle real quickly, looks like Barrington probably will win the seats they're looking for.
Let me ask you something about the proxy advisors.
Sure.
And this might be a slight divergence, but
okay.
One of the things that we notice, on our other podcast, particularly on Proxy Countdown, we pay attention to this sort of like in a ancillary way. We're focused more on the people that get put on the boards and the contests, and you're focused, you got much bigger view of the contest. It does seem that the proxy advisors only seem to really do diligence around the directors themselves when an activist is involved. It's almost as if because the year prior, the advisors are generally in favor of every single director, but an activist steps in, says this company's underperforming, or we think there's breakup value here, or whatever their thesis is.
Right.
And you see the proxy advisors sort of flip. So now you bring up Barrington and Matthews, right? Yeah. Now all the advisors, Egan Jones and Glass Lewis and ISS are all behind the Barrington slate,
right.
But they were behind the entire Matthews slate last year. So what's the difference?
Before?
When you see these things happen, is it just part of the engagement between the activist and the advisors, or is it there are no other options? What do you think?
2 or 3 factors. First, votes outside of a proxy contest or director recommendations tend to follow policy. Okay, and so it's, ISS and Glass Lewis and they spend a huge amount of time crafting their policies, and they get a lot of input and so forth. It's really a pretty good way of trying to determine how to vote. Okay, but if they're going to look at at Matthews, they're going to look at their governance score and so forth, and they'll say, okay, we're in the absence of kind of activist pressure, we're just going to see what the policy tells us, and the policy is got, I suppose, a little bit of bias to status quo. They're going to really only recommend against incumbent directors in the absence of an activist situation, only if there's something really unbelievably serious going on, in terms of governance and so forth. But it happens. Okay, that's the first factor. So they're voting according to policy. Second, there is more interaction here. So the company and the activists make a much stronger case or different case than just ISS being able to read a bunch of disclosures and calculate a governance score at Glass Lewis. The third is that there's a different group involved. for proxy contests, at least at ISS, I forget what it's called at Glass Lewis, they get the special situations group involved. And so they have a whole different set of analysts that look at these situations and decide, okay, the activist is right, or it's mostly right, or, we think it's 2/3 right, so we're going to recommend 2 out of 3 board seats or whatever. Okay. But yeah, and that's a great observation, that once an activist starts to get involved here, things get elevated in a way where the recommendation just is handled differently.
Thank you, Mike and Matt.
Yeah, you got to thank me. I mean, I'm the most important thing.
For that Proxy Activism in 2025 report. Let's move over to our, I should repeat that's Shareholder Primacy Podcast, available through our productions, Free Float Productions, available everywhere you get your podcasts. And in fact, Matt, Ann Lipton, I see her featured regularly in New York Times Deal Book section. Ann Lipton, the very quotable Ann Lipton.
Ann Lipton, if you haven't listened to Shareholder Primacy, she is fabulous. She's got hot takes left and right that are well thought out. She is a securities law professor at Tulane. I think she's actually just switching up her position. She's moving colleges, but she is highly sought after expert in the space. So you got to listen.
Moving over to our vote results table. Over the last week, I looked at, dozens of meetings that came in. I'm only going to highlight a few of the outliers because, as usual, investors don't really have much to say at these meetings. Most things pass with well over 90% of the vote. Most shareholder proposals are struck down. 2 notable meetings. One, Simulations Plus, 41%. Voted no against Dr. Walter Woltosz. He is the former CEO. He's 79 years old. He's been a director since 1996, including 28 years as chair. And also, he's not really even a doctor. He has an honorary doctor of science from Auburn, but still refers to himself as a doctor. I'm a little bit unsure about that. And he also controls 17% of the total vote at Simulations Plus. So this means that shareholders really want him gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's see what happens. Let's see if he actually leaves. He's been there since the Clinton administration, Matt.
Not long enough, really.
And finally, at Central Garden and Pet, all directors received about 12% votes against them, except for, which is pretty high, actually, 12%, except for newly appointed director Randall Lewis, who got 99.9% yes. I guess shareholders are willing to give Randall a chance. And Christopher Metz, who got 28% votes against, 28%. And that is because of the classic, Matt. Metz attended only 70% of meetings. And I'm not saying we shouldn't vote out Metz. Go ahead, vote out Metz. But can we all agree to find any other data point which might suggest an underperforming director? Can we find something to agree on?
Yeah, if he didn't attend 2 meetings.
That's it for the vote results table. Not much going on there. Let's move over to the big vote picks, where we're looking at all the companies having annual meetings next week. The 2 I focused on this week are Apple and Deere, Matt. But what did you look at this week?
So I looked at Apple and Deere also, but I also included at least one shareholder proposal, though Apple and Deere, from a shareholder proposal standpoint, which is they are just rife with anti-ESG targeting. In fact, most of the proposals at Apple are traditionally anti-ESG, anti-DEI.
Yes.
They're sort of like the vaguely white grievance.
All of them, Matt. All 4 of them. One from the National Legal and Policy Center, one from Boyer Research, right? One from National Center for Public Policy Research, another one from
Inspire through Wayne Franson, which
biblically
is
responsible investing.
But what's interesting about the Apple ones in particular is one of the Apple ones from the National Public Policy. What are they? The National Legal and Policy Center.
Sure. They sound alike, those two organizations. National Legal and Policy Center, and then there's the National Center for Public Policy.
They're funded by all the same
Research.
people. They're all fake in terms of their independence. They're
fake
all
everything,
funded
Matt.
by all the same people.
Well, when you look even deeper and you look at their analysis, they're fake analysts, they're fake researchers. They don't really know what they're talking about.
Well, I have to say, the National Legal and Policy Center asked for a report on ethical AI data acquisition and usage. And nowhere in it do they say anything about religious discrimination against white people. They're looking actually for a report that you can get behind. You could get behind sort of how are you going to put AI on these devices that we carry around with us everywhere, and we can and that can track everything. Meanwhile, simultaneously, then they have multiple from Boyer Research and National Center for Public Policy Research, which is not the same as the first one. In fact, the National Center for Public Policy Research, theirs is just request to cease DEI efforts. That's the proposal. Just stop it. That's what they're saying.
Stop.
And the one from Wayne Franson through Inspire Investing is effectively the same thing. Just stop, being anti-religious through your charitable giving, which is what Boyer filed at Deere, and that's the one I'm going to talk about in a second. But I think we should do directors first.
All right, let me tell you what my suggestion, at least at Apple. I think Apple's the only company I have director suggestions. This is a board that's been there since like 1914. But I'm looking. I look at it through our gender influence gap. That's a performance data that you can only find at freeflowanalytics.com. Apple has a sizable gender influence gap of minus 22%. And I'm looking at two men who are causing that gap. That's Art Levinson and Ron Sugar, who combined to control 31% of total board influence. They have been there respectively for 25 and 15 years. So that's my very simple recommendation. Time to say goodbye to Levinson and Sugar at Apple. And let's find some women. Let's close that gender influence gap. That's my suggestion.
So the funny part is, for totally different reasons, I am 100% in agreement with.
Okay, good. See, there's a lot of ways to use the data at Free Flow Analytics.
So here's the way I looked at both Apple and Deere. First I started with meritocracy. So in the free float data, we have basically sort of the 5 pillars of meritocracy built into the data. And this is, we talked about it last week, but do these people have advanced knowledge of the industry that they're on the board of? Do they have they had leadership experience as CEOs or multiple boards? Do they have big networks? Are they a powerful person? And that's just, they're on the board because they're a powerful person. Do they have an economic interest in the company? Meaning, do they have a significant stake? Are they a founder? Are they, a large shareholder of some kind? And then finally, do they perform? Like, have they actually have a track record of delivering returns to shareholders at the other boards that they've been on? If you got 3 out of the 5, we kind of flag you and say, it's really hard to argue that you don't merit a spot on this board. Not that you don't or that you do, but it's hard to argue against you, on paper.
Because you might be an organization that's looking at specifically at 2 of those performance metrics, right?
Yeah, you might only care about knowledge on the
just
board.
One, exactly.
You might, whatever your thing is. But for the purposes of this, let's focus on the ones that don't meet that criteria. Okay. They don't have at least 3.
Go ahead.
And for Apple, that's Art Levinson, Alex Gorsky, and Monica Lozano. Mm-hmm. So Art is among them. Art's been there basically. He's the only longtime director that's a Steve Jobs holdover, right?
Okay.
A few of the directors have been on boards with Steve Jobs, but Levinson's been on it since 2000, like the Jobs heyday in some ways.
Sure.
Through the end of Jobs' life. So I think Levinson is there for institutional knowledge.
Except you do already have Tim Cook, who was Steve Jobs' COO.
At some point, 25 years of institutional knowledge is not required for on a go forward basis,
especially when you consider what Apple was in the year 2000. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure that what Apple was producing in the year 2000 was iPods.
Yeah, I don't even know if they were that far along. Yeah,
I think at this point you can probably say we can be done with the guy who was here when we spearheaded, the iPod Shuffle.
Yeah, he'll
move on from that.
I'm sure he'll still call once in a while and offer advice.
The second two there were Gorski and Lozano. Now, Alex Gorski and Monica Lozano, they're hugely connected to the rest of this board. In fact, Lozano is connected to 38% of the board, and Gorski is connected to 50% of the board through other board roles and people they know in common.
Sure.
So Gorski is busy. He's also on the JP Morgan board. Shouldn't he be busy replacing Jamie Dimon at some point?
I don't think anyone's replacing Jamie Dimon at this point.
And Lozano's on the Target board rolling back DEI programs. So Lozano in particular, her career was in Hispanic media. And one of the things that I like to check is the knowledge map that we have at Free Float, which is basic knowledge that's required to be at the position you are. If you're the CEO of a media company and you went and you got your master's in communications, clearly media is a course knowledge of yours. It has to be in order to be there. I like to map that against what they say in a skills matrix that's reported on the proxy. Lozano somehow is listed in the skills matrix as having environmental issues as a skill.
Is that right?
There is no mention of environmental issues in her bio. There is they say she has ESG expertise also on the Target board, but not on the Bank of America board. She does not have that as a skill there.
Well,
so
Bank of America is being honest.
So someone's being honest and someome's not being honest is really what happens in the end.
Maybe you said she was the head of a media conglomerate. Maybe there was reporting about the environment.
Yeah, one day there was a flood, and they probably said that. So I have vote no's just on meritocracy for Levinson, Gorski, and Lozano. And Levinson's sort of a double no because, as you said, he's been there for 25 years. Which brings me to Sugar, agreement on
Ron Sugar.
Apple's age cap for a director is 75 years old. I'm waiting for the discriminating against old people lawsuit to come out of Boyer Research and the National Center for Public Policy.
We've talked about this age limit a lot. I mean, I don't necessarily see the argument for it. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue that just because you turn 75, you can no longer serve as a director.
I mean, I'm mostly okay with it. I don't care deeply.
Combined with tenure, then it matters.
I think that's true. That's the correct way to think of it. When you combine it with other factors, it begins to matter. But in Ron Sugar's case, and Ron Sugar is highly accomplished, been on a bajillion boards. I actually have a picture of him on my wall because he's one of the patron saints of Proxy Countdown. He's like OG. He's like Kevin Garnett, right?
Great name, Ron Sugar.
In 2024, Apple waived the age cap for Ron Sugar. And now in 2025, they are waiving the age cap a second time.
Yeah.
Okay, not a problem, except that your reason that they disclose in the proxy for waiving the age cap is, quote, significant recent refreshment in board composition and institutional knowledge. Here's what significant recent refreshment in board composition is. Wanda Austin was added to the board in 2024. She's age 70, so she's only got a 5-year tenure if they stick by the age cap. Alex Gorski was added in 2021. That was the next ad. That was the next prior ad.
Right.
And added with Monica Lozano in 2021.
That's it.
The average board refreshment rate in the last year for U.S. boards was 6%. 6% of boards that are turned over. In the last 15 years, Apple had a 4.7% refresh rate, and in the last 3, they had a 4.7% refresh rate. They are below the average refresh rate. You can't possibly argue that they had significant recent refreshment when it's below the average U.S. company. That's not significant.
Yeah, it's a strange rationale, to be sure. They could have just said we really love Ron Sugar. It's weird to pull out a reason like that.
They're better off just saying Ron Sugar is one of our favorite people
We love
on
Ron.
earth. We love him. It's not exactly like investors are going to listen to what we have to say and vote against him anyway. So my recommendations at Apple were no to Ron Sugar, no to Art Levinson, no to Alex Gorsky, and no to Monica Lozano. With reasons.
I will say this, old-fashioned, the OG corporate governance experts would say if you have the policy, follow the policy. It's that simple.
Yeah, or get rid of the
policy, exactly.
Right? If you have to overwrite the policy every year, then it's not functioning.
Let me add, before we move on, that Say on Pay at Apple, Tim Cook is making 650 times more than the median employee. That's a lot. So according to my new rules, if you're making more than the median worker on the first day of the year, you should vote no against that pay policy. It's absurd.
So how many hours does it take him to make as much as the median employee?
It's before lunch, no?
Yeah, right?
I guess it depends on when he has lunch.
I think he probably has a later lunch, so I think it does count as before lunch.
It's around lunch. So I would stay away from Tim Cook on the first day of the year at Apple because he'll be gloating in the lunchroom that he's already made your paycheck.
To the poor person behind the counter serving him the lunch.
Yeah. Well, that person's, sub-median. Right? That he made as much as that person, when he's first poured his first cup of coffee.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
All right. So, do you want to dive into shareholder proposals at either Apple or Deere?
Well, the Apple ones, I think you vote. I actually am inclined to vote yes. Yeah. On the AI policy.
I'm okay on any report on ethical AI data acquisition and usage, even if they had gone off into some weird racist rant. I still think that look, I'm basically for disclosure of all things. Really, I'm okay with most reports. Just give me a report. I love reports.
What I'm struck by is actually I would vote no on the rest of them. But here's where the Apple Deere overlap becomes interesting because there are two coming up this week, right? Or in the next 7 to 10 days.
Yeah, it's a weird juxtaposition. Go ahead.
It seems like a weird juxtaposition, except that proposal number 7 at Apple by Wayne Franson, represented by Inspire Investing, is a copy paste of the proposal at Deere. Proposal number 8, brought by a totally different person, backed by Boyer Research.
And the tell there is a very weird tell, is that they're both very oddly targeting the Southern Poverty Law Center, which an organization known for fighting, of all people, like groups like the KKK. That's who they're targeting. That's who they're angry about, the Southern Poverty Law Center.
I'm not joking. It is a point-for-point copy-paste. It's literally they added a few words to Apple so that if you put it into a Microsoft Word to do a comparison, you'd see there were some changes because you have to make some changes. But the core argument in both is the same exact language in both. And these are supposed to be totally unconnected organizations. This is the American Family Association, represented by Boyer Research, and this is Wayne Franson, represented by Inspire Investing. Totally separate organizations. So when you see it and you're doing an analysis of, many people actually look at the proponent of a shareholder proposal and they use that as a starting point for whether or not I'm going to take this seriously. This appears to be two separate proponents. It is one proposal at two totally disparate companies with totally different business models that are copy-pasted, just made to look like many people have the same argument.
Can I tell you what else stuck out to me, which I found odd, is that I noticed that we have some of the same proponents at both Apple and Deere, the aforementioned National Legal and Policy Center, National Center for Public Policy Research. I think Boyer Research, right, at both?
Yeah, Boyer is at both, yes.
But here's what was bizarre to me is that Deere a company which got rid of its DEI policies in 2024. They seem even angrier at Deere for not doing enough, for not getting rid of enough of their DEI, right? The language just seems sharper at Deere as opposed to Apple. I have no idea why. Like, didn't Deere already come through for you? It's just strange to me.
So that's a fantastic point, and it's something I brought up before, which is by caving to pressure around DEI, basically immediately.
Yeah.
Deere put itself in a position where when a bully says, "Give me your lunch money," and you give them your lunch money, they don't stop the next day, right? Like, they're not like, "Well, you gave it to me yesterday, so we're good." They go for more. In fact, they feel emboldened to go for more. And these aren't bullies that are making coherent, data-driven sort of.
In fact, I have some evidence to support that thought. But yeah, go ahead.
So I think you're right that they are more pointed at Deere. In fact, there are multiple DEI related proposals, one from As You Sow, which is meant to be sort of like a pro DEI approach, which they flipped on its head and said, we want to report on meritocracy.
They're clearly listening to our shows because they're basically saying, okay, you got rid of DEI. Why? Prove why you got rid of it.
Prove why. Yeah. Prove that you have a process of merit, which congratulations to As You Sow. That's exactly what you should be asking for.
And John Chevedden, kind of the same idea, right? With his civil rights audit.
John Chevedden with the civil rights audit, although the civil rights audit is a recycled one from many other companies. We see that also sort of a copy-paste version. So it's a little bit here. But then there's Boyer Research, which is asking for, sort of like a report on discrimination in religious, charitable giving, religious discrimination in charitable giving. And then there is a prove that you're not doing DEI proposal. Who's that one from? I can't even remember. It was one of the national.
Prove that you're doing DEI.
Prove that that a report on it's the National Legal Policy Center. They're saying racial gender hiring statistics because they want to prove that you're not doing the DEI.
Yeah,
right?
and they're being deliberately like hate mongering, and they're deliberately getting data wrong. For instance, they report that according to the census, that whites constitute 76% of the American population, but when you look at the census data link that they provide, it's actually, according to the census, white alone, not Hispanic or Latino, is actually 58%. So they're deliberately like messing with numbers to prove a racist point in that one.
But Deere basically, by caving, made themselves a target even more. There's so many anti-DEI, discrimination-based, anti-ESG shareholder proposals that they're swimming in shareholder proposals. I mean, none of them will probably rise above 2%.
Yeah, right.
Votes, as is typically the case. But then why cave?
Yeah.
Right? Like, investors would have backed you if you had stood tall, but you caved. So I did the one I focused on, the one that I looked at was Boyer Research.
Okay.
Because it's proposal number 8. It's an easy no. But what struck me is I mentioned that proposal 8 is a copy paste of the Apple proposal, right? Like, they're basically the exact same thing. In the original proposal filing, to your point, they mentioned Southern poverty law and how it discriminates against religious groups in its hate maps. And they mentioned Human Rights Campaign and their call for social media to censor hate speech, which they view as a threat to religious freedom. And they say, your charitable giving, because you rolled back your DEI, but your charitable giving does not kind of conform. There's a religious discrimination in it, right? Like, that's kind of what their original proposal says. They filed an exempt solicitation. Now, reading the exempt solicitations is one of my favorite things, because Boyer filed an exempt solicitation to back proposal number 8, saying you should vote yes on this. And we're looking for that report on the charitable giving and why it discriminates against religious giving. And then they make a totally different argument. They don't respond to the company's response because Deere apparently the charitable organization does not give to the Southern Poverty Law Center. They do not give to the Human Rights Campaign. They actually had nothing to do with rolling back DEI. It's a separate organization that Deere contributes to. Mm-hmm. They offer matching to employees who want to give to the foundation. The matching specifically says that the foundation does not give directly to Bible schools for missionary work. And Boyer has decided that there's a double standard because they partner with an organization called Kickstart that works with farmers in Africa, deer and farming and the whole thing, farmers in Africa. And that organization occasionally partners with churches in Africa to distribute farming education.
Right. Exhausting.
And because of that, there's a double standard because they won't fund a Bible school down the street in Idaho, but they will give money to help farmers in Africa, and somewhere in that supply chain is a religious organization.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with the Southern Poverty Law Center Human Rights Campaign, has nothing to do with their actual proposal. Totally separate new argument.
I'm in full agreement with you here. The one that stuck out to me is the one from the National Center for Public Policy Research asking for a corporate financial sustainability report. This one relies, Matt, on the teachings of citizen journalist Robbie Starbuck. They call him citizen journalist. But before I go further, what exactly is a citizen journalist? And can I be a citizen pediatric surgeon? Is that possible?
Yes. I would not advise doing the surgery, but yes.
Yeah, but two of the things that stick out to me, and this is where I'm just exhausted by these arguments because they're so tongue in cheek. They're so unserious. They're intentionally misleading. Two of the things that they in this proposal, one, they say that customers want to hear that Deere will no longer participate in the corporate equality index score from the Human Rights Campaign.
Oh,
Matt, do you really think that the Deere customers buying the 400R dry spinner spreader are really asking about the corporate equality index score from the? I mean, it's so fake. I'm like my jaw drops when I see arguments like this. The other thing is that it's just sloppy. I mean, really, they should call themselves citizen investors, citizen researchers, citizen analysts. I don't know what.
They should call them guy on Twitter. That's what they should call it.
Because here's another argument. They say that they're quoting Starbucks saying that John Deere is now at a 1-year low in stock price and that the only company to thrive after Starbucks reporting is Tractor Supply, who did a full rejection of woke policy. So they're saying that because Deere didn't fully reject all woke policies, that their share price is struggling, except National Center for Public Policy Research should know that Starbucks is referring to a share price that happened in August of 2024 when Deere's stock price was $347. And now Deere's stock price just went over $500. So Matt, none of it is based on real analysis. It's all just a bunch of fake hocus pocus hate mongering. It's disappointing, honestly, when you dig into their arguments.
What I'm upset about is that for all of the sort of, covert hate mongering, whatever, like the thinly veiled racism and or the the woke is evil, whatever,
or
the
attacking
is.
American civil rights groups that go after the KKK.
Yeah, whatever
it is,
your agenda du jour is, right? The anti-woke movement, Boyer Research, Robbie Starbuck, National Center for yada yada yada, whatever your thing is, they have not figured out the same thing that an ESG proponent or a corporate governance proponent hasn't figured out either, which is vote against the directors. Stop it with the shareholder proposals and vote against the directors. That is your leverage. These are non-binding shareholder proposals. They might give you a report that says nothing.
Well, it's theater. It's political theater at this point.
It's theater. I get you want the theater, but if you want the change, then the way I looked at change here at Deere was the meritocracy, and I looked at it, the people who are voting to roll back DEI without a single strategic thought about the unintended consequence of doing so. So in this case, I suggested voting no on Mike Johans. He's the former U.S. Senator and a U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. But as a general rule, I think it's proxy countdown rule time. Vote against politicians on boards.
Yeah. I agree. There's already a massive. These S&P 500 corporations already have massive lobbying resources, right? They already employ. So you actually don't need another politician on your board, ex-politician.
I mean, the only thing of value that he might bring is some sort of connections to people in government. But if you're a business that can't survive without backdoor politics on your board, if you're an investor, you should be wary. You should be looking at that and saying, like, isn't this a yellow flag? That if you have to add someone who doesn't have real core knowledge of manufacturing of these devices, or, I mean, great, he was the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, but it wasn't the U.S. Secretary of Manufacturing Agricultural Devices.
Yeah. Not only that, Matt, but these people need to be if you listen to the argument of Boyer Research, as an example, these directors, these ex-politicians need to be so moderate that they could speak to both a Biden administration and a Trump administration, right? They would only be effective if they had the ear of whoever's in power.
Yeah,
and we know that's not the case. We know that these are partisan politicians.
Let's say, we know that in the United States, 56% of directors are current or ex-CEOs, which means the U.S. market values directors, for better or for worse, that are or were CEOs somewhere. These politicians, nearly all of them do not qualify. They don't have corporate leadership. They don't have P&L experience. They don't have 5 to 7 year corporate sort of strategic decision making. They don't bring any of that to your board. So not only does having an ex-US senator with no real core knowledge of the manufacturing processes at Deere, having them on your board doesn't add, core knowledge that you might need, but they don't have corporate leadership. And in this case, Johans has poor board performance. His performance numbers are below average for board members. So when it comes to meritocracy, there were some easy no's here. No to Mike Johans, and I would abstain from Sherry Smith, and only because she didn't hit the merit metrics, but she's one of 2 accountants on this board.
Yeah.
She has 13 years of tenure. The other accountant is Neil Hunn, who's the CEO of Roper. He got a degree in accounting, but he's not like an accountant.
Sure.
So I think you want to say 13 years, find another accountant. Sherry Smith, I'm sure you're a nice person, but there are other accountants out there you could put on this board. You don't need one with 13 years of tenure.
Yeah.
I think that doesn't make sense.
Before we sign off, Matt, are you making a distinction between voting no and abstaining?
No, I am in my mind because
it's a soft no.
It's a soft no.
Okay.
It's a soft no.
Any other? Anything else you want to add on our upcoming annual meetings?
Yeah. Well, there's 2 more at Deere, right?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
No on Alan Huberger. Now this one pains me.
Sure.
Huberger is from Cascade Asset Management, the Gates Foundation's asset manager and a free float client.
Oh.
But on paper, if I'm going to be true to my meritocracy
go ahead
metrics, his background's in econ and math. He has a background in investing in farmland. I get it. I know why he's not
looks
like
good
a
on
bad
paper.
play. But he doesn't have the performance metrics. He doesn't have, he has some knowledge, but not the core knowledge of manufacturing. And he wasn't a CEO. He didn't pull. And so, Alan, I love you as a client, but according to the data, if I'm going to be just true to the straight up data, then you would be. I'll give him an abstain too. It's a soft no.
And again, you could quite easily make the opposite point that maybe what you're looking for is a representative from a shareholder. If that's your criteria,
I think that's right.
Then I think that's enough to vote yes on him. I mean, Matt, you're looking at 5 different performance metrics. You're just saying that if you if you don't hit 60%
You only
of
looked
them,
at those
right.
3 of the 5.
But there's a lot of different ways of articulating this. I think our overall point is find a methodology to articulate your decisions on directors on corporate boards.
I love that reframing. And then finally, no on Dimitri Stockton on the Deere board.
Got it. We've talked about
Dimitri
Stockton before. Stockton, was he the one who was on several boards who abandoned DEI?
Double DEI rollback at Target and Deere.
Yes,
Double
right.
DEI. And he was
thing.
on the board
Not
of
a good
Stanley
thing.
Black & Decker when they set up their DEI programs, which they've now rolled back also. So he's set up all the DEI programs and rolled them all back.
Yeah, and to As You Sow's point, if you're going to do this, prove it. Tell us why. Prove it. We know you have the data. Show us why the DEI program is not being effective, or it's a negative, drain on some other performance metric. We just show it. Prove it.
That was it for me.
Okay, that's it. That's the proxy countdown for the week of February 17th, 2025. It's a lot. Whenever you have companies, especially of the magnitude of an Apple and Deere, there's really a lot to talk about, and we're just giving you a way into part of the meeting, right? Because there really is a lot. There's, I think, 8 combined shareholder proposals at those 2 companies. A lot of long tenured directors you could think about. So join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks and wayward directors drinking rancid water. I hate saying that.
Yeah, it's terrible.